Notion recurring tasks have always been a pain in the ass. My main reason for saying this is because you can't even see the task that you create in advance. So I went ahead and created a workaround. It took me a couple of hours, but after a quick setup, you're able to see any recurring task in advance. The system's a bit complex and has a lot of moving parts. I'm going to go step by step and start with the minimum value product. So we essentially need to create a lot of pages at once that are separated by some number of days, and then based on our initial settings, it should also repeat as frequently as you want it to. I'm going to store these initial settings inside a master recurring tasks database to abstract the functionality of recurring tasks away from the rest of my workspace. And then we have a task table that has the actual tasks. And the reason I did it this way is because I want to still be able to create regular tasks inside my task database. So you can use this in any workspace that you have that has a tasks database. So now that we've defined the problem and the structure that we're planning to use, let's go ahead and dive right into the properties that I used. So our first property is frequency, and our second property is unit of time. To get the basic system up and running, I decided to stick with consistent repetition. In consistent repetition, our frequency tells us whether it's 2 or 3, and unit of time tells us whether it's a week or a year. And then of course I had to spend precious time creating a natural language property for my user that tells them exactly what I just said in a nice little sentence. These last 4 user input properties just tell us when this starts and when it actually ends. And we need this system to end, or else we'll just be stuck in an endless loop of creating a bunch of different pages in Notion, which is why Notion doesn't have this feature in the first place. So I've given you 2 options on how to choose the end of your occurrence. You have a date, which is pretty straightforward, and then you have a number of occurrences, which you can just directly set using the end after occurrences property. So now we know what information we're getting from the user. We now need to extract core properties like the number of occurrences the user wants to create. For the ends after end type, this is straightforward. It's just the value that the user gives us. But if they give us an end date instead, we have to go ahead and convert that into a number of occurrences so we know how many pages to actually create. At this point, my next step was to make things more user-friendly. So I had already decided before I even started this project that I was going to create 2 to 3 buttons, and one of them would allow us to create 5 items, one of them would allow us to create 1 item. Finally, if needed, I would see if I needed to create a create 10 items button. These buttons go ahead and create pages in the tasks database and link it to this master recurrence page. Now, these buttons may seem pretty straightforward, but since we're chunking our task creation into little segments of 5 at a time, we need to make sure that we know what the last created date was in the last section of 5. For this piece, I search through the list of related tasks and find the item that has the latest date, and I use that latest date to create the next set of 5 items. Since we're creating 5 items at a time with buttons, I decided to create directions that tell us exactly how many times we need to click each button for our recurrence. These directions are super helpful, especially when I was troubleshooting, and when I was actually using the system myself, I didn't know how many tasks I still had to create, so I just looked at the directions, which were super handy in telling me, like, oh, click it 1 more time, click this button 3 more times, etc., etc. So that is all you're really going to need if you don't plan on using any type of inconsistent repetition in your recurring tasks. Before we dive deeper, let's go ahead and recap everything that we've done so far. If you actually like this, comment down below if you would use it in your workspace. Right now, for creating recurrence, we choose 4 properties: frequency, unit of time, end type, which also includes choosing when your recurrence is going to end, and the start date. Then, using these values, we calculate how many pages we need to create. After we've calculated how many pages we need to create, our handy-dandy directions property tells us how many times we need to click each button. I've switched to an example where I actually include the time, but then you use those directions to click the button, and then you have a bunch of pages pop up. If you head over to your Notion calendar, you can also see these pages that were created in there. Now, since we use these buttons to chunk our task creation, our buttons go ahead and find the last created date, and then use that value to create the next set of 5 tasks. We then rinse and repeat until our directions are empty, and all of our prospective tasks have been created up until our end date. Now it's time to actually get a little bit more complex. So, what does inconsistent repetition mean? Well, think about something like Monday, Tuesday of every week you're repeating. I would argue that that's inconsistent because Monday to Tuesday is only 1 day difference, but then Tuesday to the next Monday would be 5 or 6 days. I forget. Basically, because of that inconsistent repetition, we can't use the same system that we've been using. So, we introduced two new properties just for our inconsistent weekly repetition. Those properties are going to be the adjusted start date array. This adjusted start date array is created from another user input property, which is the days of the week that they want to repeat for this weekly repetition. We take the start date, the singular value that they've given us, and map it according to the days of the week. For November 24th, the next Monday and next Tuesday are going to be the days right after, since it's a Sunday. And if we choose something like November 30th, the start date array gets changed to December 2nd and 3rd, which are the following Monday and Tuesday after the 30th. The adjusted start date array gives us a blueprint for the repetition that we want. It tells us we're going to have Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, and Monday to Tuesday is 1 day, and Tuesday to Friday is 3 days. And then Friday back to Monday again is another 3 days. From this, we're going to create a repetition array, which tells us the exact same information, except it just has those numbers in it. The way this works is kind of like how we counted off numbers for groups in school. We have 3 groups, so you're a 1, you're a 2, and you're a 3. And the next guy is a 1, the next guy's a 2, the next guy's a 3. And these individual tasks hold their number, so they know what their number is based off of a property in the tasks database. Now, using that property, I identify whether it's a Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday. So it's kind of like assigning those groups as indexes of the repetition array is what allowed me to be able to look through the list and see how many days I needed to add to this specific date to get the next date. Say you guys are counting off your groups, right? And everyone's already done. And then we have one kid that comes late to class and she's like, hey, what was the last group number that I assigned? And then the last person in line would be like, oh, I was a 2. The kid that came late would now be a 3 because the last person that was assigned was a 2. So in our situation, the last day that was created in the batch of 5 that we previously had was Tuesday, January 14th. So we know the next one should be Thursday, January 16th, and now the algorithm knows that as well. So that is really everything that we have for this recurring tasks workaround, if you would like to call it that. There are some kind of gimmicks here where if you click the buttons a little too fast, they might get overlapped or recreated. So I would just recommend watching the directions and then clicking the buttons only after the next direction has populated, which has usually worked for me. And if you're excited in using the system, or at least trying it out and playing around with it, I would love for you to test it out in the link down below.